at that point, we'll talk about next steps and the conclusions of this committee's work and what people can expect to come on from here. So that's my idea for the format. So with that, I will wrap it up and turn the floor over to Mr. Bill Kramer, who is prepared to give us his assessment of the situation and his recommendations around what we should do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tracy. Once again, I would like to commend the committee members for their industrious effort. We did share a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls back and forth as I was producing my report. And normally I don't have citizen input. I'm working for a municipality, a village, a county, and it's pretty much at the direction of the elected and appointed officials in that community. This was different, and this was special. And we did get some direct input and direct feedback from the people who care most about the fire and EMS service, that is, the citizens. There will be two separate reports. My report deals with facts, figures, data, recommendations, and options, but does not tell the village which option is best. It certainly points out the pros and cons of each. The Citizens Committee will give their report and their recommendations independent of mine. However, I think it was important that we did share information back and forth. There were clarifications on budget dollars that the committee was able to come up with so that my dollar figures, my opinions regarding the alternatives were based on factual data. The committee asked me for clarification on about 6 issues, which I clarified for them in return. So there was some good exchange, and that way we were working in unison. We were not working at cross purposes, and the information that the council will have to work with will be unified, coherent, consistent. What are those options? One is to try to retain and protect the existing fire EMS service within the heart of the village. And virtually all of the alternatives tend to fall short if we don't include that at least as a basic minimum. Whether it retains its identity as an individual single fire EMS service from within the village or whether it becomes part of some other entity. We don't want to abandon the central response point. If we go with alternatives that include mingling the Mariemont resources and personnel with other agencies, there are some difficulties with that. There may be some savings, but look at it this way. Right now, Little Miami Fire District and Mariemont work seamlessly, cohesively. There is a group of personnel on duty shared between the two stations. There is a fleet of apparatus, fire trucks, ambulances, and support vehicles shared by the two communities. If we talk about savings, we are also talking about service reductions. Because if we can do with one less ambulance, one less fire truck, the existing fleet that's currently shared between these communities is reduced, so that there is a fleet reduction. You can get that same savings by each community agreeing to reduce something and sharing what's left. It would be the same. So you don't have to give up your identity and your individual fire department to share resources and gain savings. Same with personnel. If we have 4 on duty normally here, 4 on duty normally in Little Miami down the street, this area, the joint area, has 8 personnel on duty, a sufficient quality number to handle fire, medical emergencies, and simultaneous EMS calls. If we want to save money by reducing personnel, by reducing the number here or there or both, then there's a service reduction. So savings are possible, but there would be a requirement for some type of a compromising of the existing strengths in equipment, personnel, etc. So my recommendation is going to come down along the lines of, I think, similar to what I'm hearing from the Citizens Committee, and that is to see first how we can preserve this central distribution point for fire and EMS, whether it's retaining the individuality of the Mariemont Fire EMS Department, or whether it's part of another agency that maintains this facility right here. I do believe that's important. And if the Mariemont community and the village council decides based on all the evidence, based on the facts and figures, based on the Kramer report, and based on the Citizens Committee, our best option seems to be to find and preserve the status quo and tweak it to where it'll be working and where it will be affordable. If that's the case, I've agreed that I can take this one step further and show how to gain some efficiencies from within the fire service. Now, I did take some pictures a few days ago of an auto accident that occurred on Wooster and Pleasant, and you may have seen those pictures. We saw the police vehicle controlling the scene, blocking traffic. We saw the all-purpose Quint 67 on the scene, which carries hose, water, rescue equipment, aerial ladder. We saw that there to handle the rescue needs. And then 3 EMS transport units were used. Since there were 4 people on duty, they were able to bring the apparatus from Mariemont and a responding EMS unit. We also needed 2 additional units. Little Miami sent their ambulance, and Anderson Township provided the 3rd EMS unit. So that was that. But the reason I bring that up, now what about that police vehicle down the street? Very often, the police is there very quickly. Chief Hines is a fabulous police force, and he's been a great leader. And they are on the scene often as quickly as the fire department for a fire situation. Very often, that police vehicle is right there at the hydrant where the hose is starting to be taken into the scene. Fire truck stops, they wrap the hose around the hydrant, the truck continues to the scene. And oftentimes, the fire department has to leave a firefighter behind to turn on that hydrant. There are things that can be done to gain efficiencies within the village, such as not cross-training police and fire to do everything as they do in Amberley Village, but instead just having some joint training where that one firefighter could be freed up if the police officer who's blocking the street right at the hydrant could also turn on that wrench. I've got about 6 things where we can gain some economies and some efficiencies right here within Mariemont if we needed to do that in order to preserve what we have. And that's without any additional tax increases. If the citizens would want to pony up more, it would preserve almost into perpetuity the quality fire EMS service that you already have. So I think that's pretty much where we are. I have a second draft completed, and it'll be up to council to decide when they finally want to put this to bed and accept my final draft. So with that, Tracy, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I would like to have some of my fellow committee members, any questions or clarifications that you'd like to bring in a bill. You've got some thoughts about some of the savings potential that we may be weighing against any changes in service.
I guess my number one question would be, multiple times in your report, you quoted the fact that the current model part-time fireman is at risk. And then there was an article in the Inquirer yesterday, or Sunday, yesterday, sorry, about the fact that there's 166 open positions in the Hamilton County area, and that part-time firemen are really difficult to get, are getting very difficult to get. And then you quoted in your study the fact that, as we all know, our kids have a different work ethic, if you want to call it that. They like their quality of life is a little bit more important than an extra few dollars. So I guess my concern is, if we stay with the current model that we have, and I kind of agree with your conclusion, but shouldn't we go on a parallel line to start looking at continue our relationship with Little Miami? Because I'm worried that if this model falls, we can't afford $1.3 million in salary. And I think that was the number you said if we had to go full time, and if we could get those people, right?
I thought we heard the opposite from what we investigated. I thought we heard you can't, like, a lot of people apply for the part-time position. We have never had an issue getting part-time workers.
I'm just quoting his report.
Okay.
You're actually both correct. You're both correct.
places.
Bill's correct when he says that I mentioned that regionally, part-timers are getting more difficult to recruit and retain.
But not here.
But Mariemont, and I say that right in my report, Mariemont could be the last bastion of part-time workers because this is such a desirable location. So Mariemont does not have an issue with part-timers. You hired some more recently, right, Chief? And you,
Yes.
and and it's a very deep roster. And so there is a regional problem, very true, but it hasn't struck here, and I don't see it striking here and being a problem anytime soon. Now, long range, we may have to tweak the model. We do even say that. But for now, it's good, and it could be. And there will always be some part-timers. There are always people looking for an extra shift or a half a shift a week or something. And if they're, what's the number one place they're looking to work? I can't guarantee you Mariemont's number one, but it's very high on the priority list. So when you look at the quality and the capabilities of those on the Mariemont roster, it's pretty impressive.
Would you agree, though, that our council has an obligation to the citizenry to look at alternatives just in case? I mean, we don't know what's gonna happen. I mean, you have said in your report, part-time issue is just one. I mean, I was shocked to see that article yesterday in the Cincinnati paper. And I'm not saying we should pursue it. My question is, don't they have an obligation to us to have a backup plan?
We do. We list 6 alternatives in here. And,
right. And you have a lot.
And
exactly.
they're all on the table.
Yeah.
It just appears at this time, based on the information we've collected, the status quo is an excellent alternative.
Agree 100% with you. Just asking about the future. Yeah, I guess.
Bill,
Can you call me Bill, though, if you don't mind?
My response to and Bill, you obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I agree, the part-time system is tough. But our system here, it's a part-time system, but it's unlike the other. If you look at our roster of 42, 44 people, probably 95% of that roster, our people are career firefighters. They work full-time somewhere else. They're not looking for another job. Right. Where I think the failed systems have a lot of younger, more inexperienced firefighters that are looking for a full-time job every day they go to that part-time house. And so the turnover is constant, which we don't have, because these people here are here because they like to work here. They're not looking for another job. Retaining the people we have, if you look at the years that we've had them, they love working here and they're not looking to go anywhere else, and they're career people.
I'd like to back that up, because every meeting we've had, we've decided Mariemont is a unique place to live. It's also a unique place to work. I don't think it's a problem at all. I don't think you can compare it to other districts. It's not comparing apples to apples, because Mariemont is special.
Correct.
We're not comparing it to other districts. I'm just quoting what our consultants stated.
And in the line of their proposal, they have more part-time people on than they do full-time people.
What's the average, if I could ask, what's the average age of our firemen?
I'd say at least 45.
It's up there, yeah.
I've got guys that have been working here for over 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
How long you been here?
Since 2003.
That's more than most of the residents.
We got paramedics.
We got district chiefs, lieutenants, bosses from other places. We got the Cincinnati fire chief that works here, Chief Mike Washington. We're just very blessed with the experience and the caliber of people we have. Second to none.
We're very happy with them too.
Thank you.
So another, there were some concerns around labor. That was an issue that was addressed in the report. I think that one of the other things that we had talked somewhat about was the condition of the facilities and viability of the facilities going forward. Could you give a brief overview of your findings in that?
Yeah, I think I'll defer to Tim Wiley, our resident architect who's on the committee, because he did an actual authoritative architectural review. Tim, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Like I said in a previous meeting, the facility does have some needs, but there are needs that can't be overcome. The firefighters do an excellent job of making the situation that they have work. There are some situations where that could be improved, like it's not ideal to have the bunks in the basement and to have to go up the stair for response time considerations, but like I said, they make it work. It's adequate for the response times that we're seeing now. So there are areas of improvement that could be improved over time and planned for financially. So yeah, in my opinion, it's a feasible option for the foreseeable future. So that's the real brief version of it. So.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
Tim, how much do you think it would cost us if we wanted to bring a, you know, make the improvements that we need to make, and, you know, like, want to make, not need to make, but want to make?
That's the $1 million question, right? When it comes to any sort of improvements to stations, whether you're talking of an addition or, you know, I think specifically what I saw in terms of the health and welfare of the firefighters is the separation of spaces, because you don't want to have the apparatus and the fumes from the apparatus get into the living quarters. So there could be incremental improvements that you make at a reasonable cost, but when you start to get into additions and such, then you're looking typically, depending on whether you go out or up, usually I use about $300 a square foot as a means to start that planning.
But we don't need that.
But we don't need that right now, correct?
And
Yes.
to be clear, there was no request made by
No, ma'am.
the fire and EMS and police
Right.
department for any sort of facility upgrade. And one of the things that we wanted to also clarify was, we're not under any threat or concern around being told we must.
Oh, right, that's a great.
There's nothing going on that's considered a violation that would be,
Correct.
need to be remedied, so we're not looking at a surprise capital improvement.
Right, there's no authority that's going to bring a hammer that says you must improve or do an addition. It's just for consideration for the department. Yeah.
And while we're on the subject of the location, I think that your report spoke quite a bit about the central location of the fire department and the impact on responsiveness it would have if we had any change in location. Could you speak a little bit about that issue, please?
Sure, happy to do that. When we look at the alternatives, we do have another firehouse just about a mile down the road, and it might sound like, what's the difference if they're a mile away? Well, there's a big difference at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when there's a rush hour traffic, and Chief Hines, I believe you talked to Matt about the time it took 10.5 minutes to get a backup life squad from Little Miami into Mariemont. So the fact that you are, and minutes do matter quite a bit. Today, I was on the phone with our great medical director for the village of Mariemont, Dr. Jason McMullen, and he made 2 points that I thought are vivid. They aren't even in the report, but they will be in my next draft. Dr. McMullen's advice was, you really need to keep that central location for 2 good reasons. Number one, the response time. The American Medical Association does have their guidelines that they'd like to get that ambulance there in 4 minutes or less, just as we want to try to get a fire truck somewhere in 4 minutes or less. You're not going to do that from even in good traffic conditions. To get from Fairfax to the eastern edge of Mariemont falls outside national guidelines. And so one other point he made, in addition to the response time, was the fact that it's a relatively low volume. Maybe that's why we attract so many good quality people. They're not going to be extremely busy here where they might be on their other job. They're here, they want to be here, we have high quality people, but there's not a tremendous volume of calls in Mariemont. Therefore, the likelihood of somebody having a paramedic unit immediately when they need it is very high if we preserve this central response point.
Dr. Liz, do you have anything that you wanted to add from your point of view?
I was on the subcommittee regarding safety, and from what we could tell, that we have a rescue squad teams made up of medics, paramedics, and EMTs. Paramedics are much more highly trained. They're able to give rescue medications, not just CPR. And there was a large number of the firemen that were also paramedics, and most of our people on the squad teams were paramedics as well, with very, very favorable ratios. So that was definitely a good thing to see in our fire department. We're very lucky to have the skill and the quality of the people from a medical side.
Ed, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it might be helpful if Bill just kind of educated us all on the difference between a paramedic and an EMT or EM. I think that there's a important distinction there, and what we have here is how unusually well equipped we are.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna defer that question to the actual on-duty people, because over the years, the qualifications, certifications for paramedicine have increased greatly. And if you have paramedics on duty, they have the capability of administering drugs, starting IVs, and doing a lot of life-saving endeavors that are not in the purview of the basic EMT. Basic EMTs can keep somebody alive, but they can't do the advanced work. And Chief Copeland is a medic, and he made about 4 medic calls this morning in Forest Park. So why don't you tell us the difference between a medic and an EMT, Dan?
Gotcha. So with the paramedic, we only have 4 EMTs on duty at a time. Each shift has 1 on duty. Usually if there's a difference between what we call an ALS run and a BLS run. An ALS run, we can start IVs, give fluids. We can do 12 leads, the same thing that you do in the hospital, we can do right in the back of the ambulance. We also have inline calls and online protocols that are from the west side of Cincinnati all the way to the east side, and we all work under the same protocols. We carry our cardiac drugs. We carry drugs for if you're having an allergic reaction, we can take care of those. So there is a whole broad stream of everything that we can do. One of the big things is being cardiac drugs, and that we're also now starting to get into the world of TPA and being able to reverse strokes in a large, quick, and recognizing those stroke symptoms and being able to get you to the hospital in a timely manner so that you don't spend the rest of your life with any deficits. That's the trainings that we're getting. The amount of stuff that we can give and do for you for any emergency that you have medically has come a long way, and your village has an abnormal amount of paramedics on duty every shift. Is there anything that you would like to add to that on what we can do? I mean, we have to keep our board drug license. We have to train on these drugs and train on this every year. We have to sit down and go through 800 pages of documents and make sure that we understand every end of that. That's all not a cost that you guys are accruing right now.
And that's paramedic.
That's paramedic. EMT can do basic life support. They can do your CPR. They can do, bandage your wounds. We can do a lot of that. We've got drugs that if you have had an incident and taken off an arm, we have TPA and stuff that we can give to make you be able to get to the hospital, but you have to have those people that can deliver it. We also have Lucas machines here now that frees us up, that we have a machine that does CPR on you, and would you guys not agree? It's an amazing piece of apparatus that we have now.
We have 2 of them.
We have 2 of them.
We have 2 of them.
So when you go on a call, and there's 4 of you, how many are paramedics and how many are EMTs?
3. 3
are
paramedics, 1 EMT.
And that's not common, is that right? It's usually EMTs?
Correct. That's a very high ratio of paramedics to EMTs on any medical call, anywhere in Hamilton County.
Okay, so we're above average with the service?
Or above average.
Okay.
Every one of our officers here are paramedics. Our training is all paramedics.
If Google's right, it says you have to do 1,700 hours of training versus 170. Is that about right?
That is.
Yeah.
We have to take classes off to ourselves on our off days.
I Google it because I want to know what it was.
Yeah.
It's constant.
It's constant.
Are there any other comments from the life safety kind of portion of the thing? I want to make sure that we get to a place where we talk about the financials, but I'd like to hold that to be last. Do you have anything from the kind of intangibles?
The intangibles, well, we also found not only is it the people and Mariemont that's intangible, it's what you guys provide on a dollar-wise. We found like a lot of things the fire EMS will fix around the village. And if we were to go to Little Miami. I believe that would be a union, is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
And then these services wouldn't be able to be provided. So it's a cost saving that you don't realize. It's also the service. They know you, they know the past calls you've been on. If we switch to somewhere bigger, they don't know you. They don't know your past history as well. Right now, Mariemont's so small. You know, if there's a call in Mariemont, you're most likely gonna know it if it repeats. If it repeats on a bigger system, you're not gonna remember that.
But we did take a look at the kind of the Mariemont Historical Preservation
did.
Society, as well as the other things, to ensure that if there were any changes, that wouldn't violate any of the.
It would not violate. It was similar to what was put up to vote, I believe, in 2009, except for this change in 2009, it would have been required that this firehouse stay. So it is different in the aspect that this firehouse, we don't know what would happen if we joined somewhere else.
Okay, and so now turn it over to Bill. Do you want to give some of the financial information that they've been?
I think
Where's
before,
the other Bill?
if I could say
So
something
it's-
before we move to finances. I've said this before, but I just am concerned that with all part-time people, if there's a high demand in the city, you know, social unrest or, you know, natural disaster, are you held back at your primary jobs? Because, you know, you're gonna have to work until the problem is resolved. And you know.
That was directly addressed in the report.
Correct.
But go ahead and.
Yeah, in the report, I do bring that up and elaborate a little bit on it.
Okay.
Maybe it's worth some more clarification tonight. There may come a time in civil unrest or prolonged natural disaster or something where firefighters are held over, or they start working every other day instead of every third day. Things like that could happen, which would preclude their attendance here, perhaps. However, we not only have firefighters from the city of Cincinnati, we have firefighters from Forest Park and numerous other communities that have full-time people. Highly unlikely that all of those people would be held back. And if, in worst case scenario, there is a statewide mutual aid network that kicks in one way or the other, each community is guaranteed protection.
Absolutely.
That's, and I say right in my report quite definitively, that should not be a criterion for decision making.
Okay.
Do you want to add anything?
I'm actually supposed to be at work at Forest Park right now. I have a gentleman that came in and covered my shift. But this is how much this meant to me to be here right now. That's how this works.
It works when everything's going fine.
What about the windstorm of 2015?
Well, I'm remembering the problems in
I
'68.
understand. We just went through a pandemic
Firemen
too.
were not let away from their duties until the problem was over.
That doesn't happen anymore, sir.
But it sounds as if this mutual aid network that we now have in
Okay.
place would make sure that we've got coverage, whether it's the home firefighters that are here or.
Absolutely.
We're not gonna be left without
It's not
any
an
kind
answer.
of emergency services.
And the Hamilton County Fire Chiefs, just this month, we're actually talking about that. If there was a huge fire on the west side of Hamilton County, east side fire departments could actually move up to cover west side fire departments and vice versa. So if you have a large Kellogg's, let's say Kellogg's is fully involved in fire, and pretty much every east side fire department is there, you might have a Colerain Township fire engine or Forest Park fire engine sitting in this firehouse. So those fire chiefs are now getting together and helping each other out. So that far west side fire department, Green Township, Ross over in Butler County can also come over. So.
Okay.
Yeah, before we get to financials, one of the points in your report, Bill, was you recommended that the village have a fire chief, not just an assistant chief, but a fire chief. And but that's, you didn't really elaborate on that too much. Could you explain that, or what your rationale or reasoning is for that?
Well, I think Dan would gratefully accept a promotion. It doesn't cost any more money. And Chief Hines would become police chief and safety director. Now, the reason I say that is for two reasons. Number one, titles are less expensive than pay raises. And a lot of people want 5 bugles on their chest to be a fire chief. But I feel strongly that the ranking member of a fire EMS organization should have the title fire chief because of all the regionalization that's going on. We just talked about it now. When Dan Copley goes to a Hamilton County Fire Chiefs meeting, I don't want to see Dan there as the only one wearing 4 bugles where everybody else has 5. Even these small one-station departments all have a fire chief. So I do recommend that we make that, even if he continues to do exactly as he's doing now, I would recommend that title change.
So it's just a show of,
Gives us equal footing in regional efforts with all other fire departments.
and shows the work that he's already doing.
Yes.
It's a merit thing, I guess.
Unless you turn it down, Dan, I don't know, you, well.
All right, anything else before we get to the financials of the committee? We'll open it up to public comment momentarily.
Okay, going to your report, Bill, page 62, which is the negotiations that occurred between Little Miami and our council. There are 2 columns for cost savings if we consolidate, well, I won't call it consolidate, if we use them. How's that? That's probably right.
Contract services.
Well, whatever we choose to do, there's a lot of options. But there are 2 columns. One of them shows $282,000 savings, and the other one shows an $89,000 savings. Now, Matt, Bill, and I looked at the intangibles that the fire department does for us, and we put a number to it of about $91,000. So subtracting that $91,000, that's the leaf blowing, taking the phone calls in the evening and all the other stuff that was on the list. That brings us to $191,000. And my question for you is this: the difference between that $191,000 and the 80, well, it wouldn't be 88, it'd be like 20,000. Is on page 9 you reference whether we would need 7 or 8 people on a shift. If we need 7, we get $191,000. If we need 8, we have to, because we only make $20,000. So that's a big differential. I mean, it's actually a showstopper. If you said all we were going to do is save $20,000, I'd say we wasted our time, right? So
We're going to try to put these figures up on the screen so people can follow along.
So on page 9 is where you reference.
I don't know which one to hit exactly. The mayor roll.
This is page 62.
Okay, let me see if I.
great, give it to the mayor.
As soon as you plug it in, it should pick the source up, hopefully.
Now, your 62 does not show 91.
Anybody have a grandkid, they can put that sucker up there right away, right?
All right, we're gonna try to,
Oldie but a goodie right there, right? Tim the tool man.
Could have been worse.
All right, just calm down.
At least it was that, nothing too crazy. You got it plugged up?
I think it's in the right position here.
There you go. There you go.
Okay.
All right, thanks for your
Technology.
patience, everyone. And, Bill, what page did you want, 62?
Page 62, please.
See if I can find that for you.
We might be
Well, first do me a favor, go to page 9, just so you can refresh yourself on your comment.
Okay. Page 9, okay.
Yeah, you're talking about staffing, I think that's page 9, you're talking about the staffing of the Little Miami Fire District we went to. I think you're responding to somebody's question.
2A.
Oh, okay, 2A.
Yeah.
Tab 2A.
2A right here is what we're looking at.
Am I correct? You say it could be 7 or 8, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so then if you go to page 62,
All right, let's go to 62.
I'll put a caveat in here. These are numbers that our committee developed. These came from the council, so.
All right.
So if you look at that, fundamentally, the difference between 3 full-timers and 4 part-timers and 3 full-timers and 5 part-timers takes away any savings. Can you give us any enlightenment in from the category of your thoughts and the experience, all the years of experience? Will it be 7 or will it be 8?
Trying to make this a little larger so we can see it. Well, if we have 8 people now between the 2 stations, and we go to 7, there's a reduction in service somewhere in this area. If we go to 6, 3 and 3, there's even a greater reduction. So savings, each savings we get comes with some sort of a service reduction, whether it's in the primary response for Mariemont or our backup. So I accepted at face value what the committee came up with in terms of these numbers. So these, at the top here, we're looking at, I think, Bill, this is what we're talking about there at the top, 3 full-time, 4 part-time, or 3 full-time and 5 part-time, which is the difference between, and these are the difference in savings.
Correct. Now, that's not including the 91,000 that we took off for the services provided outside the scope of the fireman's duties, normal duties, so.
And to be fair to the public, these were trying to put a dollar value on the additional labor that the fire and EMS
Which is
provide
that,
to the
yeah,
village.
yeah.
This is what we have right here. Oh, Dan, maybe you can help explain. We wanted to know what this off-hours non-emergency response figure. It's 58,400. You know what?
I could answer that.
Matt will answer it because he put it together.
Right.
For a night shift clerk.
I could answer
If
that.
there wasn't anybody in here, we'd have to have a night shift clerk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that replaces a night shift clerk. I appreciate that very much.
So I think that the point of some of this was trying to put dollars on some of the things that we get above and beyond what we pay in the village budget for the fire department in terms of additional services. And that obviously erodes an amount either entirely or a great deal of the savings. And I think that one of the things that is important for us to understand is this was a 2022 cost, and there are some thoughts in there around, or some additions of things in there around reimbursements, et cetera. I don't know what the kind of ongoing financial benefit would look like on a beyond 2022 into 2024, 2025, if we've got really any way to predict what that would look like. And that's.
Yeah, that's not for the numbers we have now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be in the negotiations if we choose to follow through with Little Miami and talk to them, continue to talk to them.
Yeah.
I think you could be sure there'd be escalations, because they have salary escalations as we would, so.
So this is in the best of our ability, what we were able to figure out from the
Correct.
financial benefit of the merger as we understand the terms right now.
Correct.
The other thing that I think is important for us to bring up is the fact that should this go through, Mariemont would not have a representative on the executive board. Is that?
I think we should also
That is
point out a lot
correct.
of.
Correct as of now, yeah.
Right, and also other townships are trying to get out of agreements with Little Miami Fire Department. I
So,
think we're noted as well, right?
so I think that was one
Well,
of the.
one has left and one has been asked to leave. Is that correct? Newtown left on their own volition, and Gulf Manor is being asked to leave.
Really?
So, which would, you'd have to bring into question the due diligence, because if they didn't understand the costs associated with servicing Gulf Manor, that was some poor judgment, in my opinion.
Amberley Village also left. They contracted because they cross-trained their police and their fire, so they contracted with Little Miami for their EMS paramedic service, and left and went to Brennan.
I think going back to Bill's original question was that there's a huge difference if we have the 3 and 4 versus 4 and 4 model as far as what, if any, cost savings there would be. And I'm not sure that that's completely answered in your report, Bill, and I don't know that it needs to be, but I would think that's a really good point, that if we don't have a reduction in the overall number of people staffed at the station, in this area, then we don't get the savings. I mean, or that the savings are minimal, but then add to it the overall recommendation, the overarching recommendation that you're giving us, that with response times based on safety services, that we want the central location to be able to serve all of Mariemont and have the, in the way that I think our residents expect. There are other aspects to that cost model that would have to be adjusted and adapted too, and I think I don't think that wasn't really being thought out when that cost model was put together. So, if we were going to look at potential savings, but we first decide that we need to have a station here in Mariemont, that table would have to look different. I'm not sure what it would look like, but it would look different, and it would be less favorable in cost savings wise.
That's well said. I agree with that. And we talked about the response time being favorable. This is the four-minute response map. The dark black dashed line is the corporate limits of Mariemont. You can see the 4-minute response from the central portion of the village extends beyond that. Now, if you looked at the tables of actual response times recorded at the communications center, sometimes they're beyond 4 minutes, they're around 5. But you got to realize that time starts from the time the tones go off in the station. That means the firefighters have to get their gear on, get the trucks started, get out the door, and that can add that extra minute and a half. But if we're talking about from point of central station here to any outlying area, that's what your 4 minutes looks like from Mariemont. Then the next map is from Fairfax, and this is when traffic is good. Part of Mariemont on the east side falls outside the zone. Now there's a lot of overlap. Normally when traffic conditions are good, you can see there's an overlap in the 4-minute zone between the two communities. But I think, but I tell you what, here we look at this quote at the bottom. The mapping above does not account for the times when a single lane from Fairfax causes traffic congestion. Matt Ayer did confirm with Chief Hines that afternoon is significantly worse. He tells of a time when it took LMFR medics 10+ minutes to get through one afternoon, correct? I don't want to misquote you.
Well, yeah, it wasn't their fault. It was just the traffic.
The traffic.
You can blow the siren all you want.
It's a single lane highway.
People can't pull up on the islands, and you can't go around. So it wasn't their fault. It's just the way it is.
It's a peculiar situation that we have with there really being just one route. I mean, there aren't really good alternate paths when there's traffic jams.
Bill, if you wouldn't mind going to page 72, I have a question for you about one of the recommendations. It was about, I think you called it variable staffing, or where you talked about workload. You looked at the workload of like 60 or 70% of the calls were within a 4 or 5 hour period. Are there, I guess what I'm searching for here, is there alternative savings to consolidation by, are there times in the day we could have less than 4 people on staff?
Well, there are. That's an alternative that you could consider if there were a necessity to try to reduce staffing. Some communities have gone to a power shift, much as the police departments in the bigger cities have for the more busier times of the day. Mariemont is so small that going from 4 to 3 would be an alternative some parts of the day. Not recommended, and I don't think it's necessary as long as we maintain all of our part-time people. Now, let's see, I'm not finding that here on page 72.
Oh, 72, maybe.
Okay, I'll find it for you. I'll just plug in variable staffing. Now, Rob Bartlett, who I want to commend for being very diligent in trying to get me all the information and trying to make sure we're exploring all alternatives, just yesterday sent me the times of day based on what the Mariemont runs on. And it's consistent with the national pattern. Busier during the day when everybody's out and about and busy. They slow down considerably when everybody settles in pretty much. So if we had to reduce staffing, a variable staffing would be something to be considered down the way. Let me pull this up if I can find it.
Yeah, sorry, I thought that was page 72 was on, but I'm looking to see if I have it here. You referenced it, and I thought it was kind of an interesting concept, if we had periods of the day when, we're trying to help the village fill a gap.
Yeah, this little pie chart gives you a good idea. This is, and Rob, your numbers from Mariemont are exactly on point here. That little red thing is a 14-hour night. That's how many calls you get in a 14-hour night. The blue is a 10-hour day. So we're not even dividing it 12 and 12. So I think you could see maybe the wee hours of the morning when you're less likely to have a call. It's not so much for that first run, it's for that second call coming. You can afford to do, if you had to. Not recommending it, nowhere in the report do we recommend reducing. But we leave it out here as an alternative if belt tightening becomes necessary, and/or, as you said, Bill, we'll look at all alternatives down the future in case this model has to be tweaked for savings.
All right, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Taking a look at go ahead, everyone can have we'll do a 3-minute comment period for everybody.
Mr. Kubicki?
And if you would please, for the ICRC, let us know who you are before you begin speaking.
Can you give me a second? And I would, so do Meg, you guys could give me a couple more minutes, just to remind us.
No, very.
Got it? I get it, how this works.
I think we can start the time.
What's that?
I think we can go ahead and start the time, if we're waiting on you.
All right. Okay, I'm David Kubicki, I'm president of the Columbia Township Trustees, and I just kind of wanted to just give you an overview of how I kind of came about, what I thought. Mr. Kramer, good to see you again. And I kind of came up with the idea that I thought we'd be better off doing things together. I'm not here to attack anybody, I'm not here to go do it. There's a lot of bright people in this room. But these fire departments should have got together a long time ago. Fire facility should have been built in Mariemont, in my opinion, but that preceded me and everybody else in this room, I'm assuming, et cetera. So we kind of have to deal with the hand we're dealt with. And I just think there's a better way to combine all of our best resources and make better decisions and work together in a more formal way. We've got a brand new expensive building. You've got an obsolete building. We've got an obsolete fire engine. You've got a newer expensive one. So I thought I'd just come down here and break down the basic elements of what I think it costs to run a fire department. 4 guys, 3 men on a full-time basis, $1.2 million. Fire chief, assistant fire chief, $120 grand. These are with legacy costs, et cetera. Fire engine, I don't care if it's 1 year old or 20 years old, it should be $50 grand a year. It's $1 million piece of equipment, 20 years. You also need a backup. Ambulances, you need backups. I put $400 grand a year, 10-year life, 40 grand. Facility costs 100 grand. Whether you have a new facility, old facility, you got to pay utilities, you got to pay for replacement costs, possibly redoing the facility, rebuilding the facility. You need to put something in, and a lot of people don't budget anything. Then you need miscellaneous operating expense, about $1.8 million. Right here, I looked at what fire departments. You guys do about 568 runs. We do 748. Deer Park, Silverton, a similar size fire department, does 1,725. Here's the problem with the little Miami Fire Department. We got a $1.8 million in cost. We get $850,000 from Columbia Township, $750 from Fairfax, so we're $1.6 million. So that fire department will always be underwater. If we added $800,000, or you pick the number from Mariemont, we'd have $2.4 million to solve this problem, could hire all the men, have all the resources we want. That is my objective of why I thought this was a good idea. Plain and simple. I realize you guys can dissect all these numbers, but I don't understand how we could get to the fact that you could only save 160 grand, or that you could run a fire department for 960 grand. We're not broke. Columbia Township and Fairfax are strong financially, historically. In Hamilton County, we got plenty of money. We have over $8 million in the bank. If we have to go pay for that fire station to go fix it, we will not let that department go underwater. We're proud of our department. We will make sure that that doesn't fail. My better solution was that the three of us could share these costs together. As far as you guys taking on the debt, if Fairfax and Columbia Township have to buy that building to get you guys to go work together with us in that building, or us to come your way, I'm open-minded to it. I'm open-minded anyway. As far as it being too far away, and if some of the traffic issues were brought up, well, I get the idea there's traffic coming this way. There's also traffic going the other way to service other parts of the community. So that goes both ways. I mean, Indian Hill runs fire runs that are 5 miles away. So does Madeira. I get it.
You can have my 3 minutes.
Wait, can I ask you a
No,
question?
no, no.
Those aren't our numbers, those are yours, savings numbers. We didn't make the list.
No, Bill, I understand okay, I'm trying to dig deeper.
Time's up. I'm sorry. We can't do this
Okay.
all night.
Okay. Thank you for your time. I respect everybody in this room. I did not mean to cause any hostility. I thought there was a better solution out there. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, my name is Steve Bowles, Mariemont resident, retired one. Much of my career has been in finance. I can tell you, over all those years, I did a lot of service consolidations, which, you know, across country and stuff, that saved a lot of money. And it's a good thing. It's good that you're looking for ways to save money for the community. But having said that, there are some things, you know, in my life that you don't do that just to save money. The most important part of it is the community, the saving of the people. And the services that we provide ourselves are critical. And it turns out not to be about the money. It turns in to be about the people. And so, and I know, by the way, a lot of other residents have this point of view, that it's probably not good to share our resources to that degree, because it will have an impact in a negative way. It'll save money, but there's some things you just don't do that with. So, having said that, that's just perspective of, again, a lot of residents. So,
Thank you very much.
but thanks for considering things.
Thank you. Other people like to give their feedback or ask for questions? Please, sir.
My name is Jim Orr, and I am a Mariemont resident, have been for 4 years, so I'm newcomer. However, I have the same needs that everyone else has who lives here. I have 2 really simple questions. What problem are we trying to solve first? Because I don't hear one. When we talk about 80,000, 20,000, 50,000, what do we have, 1,700 households? These are not real numbers. And the second one, which is very related, what higher priority does the community have than the safety of its people? Can you name one? That's where I begin. And so I think the question is, if we find we have some financial difficulties, we need to deal with it. But it can't be at the expense of the people of our community. And it sounds like we are a solution in search of a problem rather than a problem in search of a solution.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can address that. I served on council here for 10 years. For 20-some years when I left, we had never raised taxes. And we've been living in a bubble, and we're facing raising some taxes. And I think it's important that we really have a handle on the numbers so we can look every resident in the eye, myself included, I'm resident dentist now, and give them accurate information so they can make the right decision, because we're at a critical point. We're very thin on our cash reserves. We have about 3 months worth of cash reserves. The other communities have multiples of that compared to us. And we're a road collapse away from using up our cash reserves. So this is coming.
No, I understand that.
So that's I think is what, this is just one part of that formula.
We have a variety of services that the village provides, and it provides it from a very small tax base. The overwhelming majority of our property taxes, which are not insignificant, I think the highest in Hamilton County,
Go to
go to
school.
schools and other services. So the fact is, the village gets a small proportion of that. Now, that may be what needs to be addressed. But again, sacrificing people's safety is not where you begin, it's the last thing.
Well, I'm not campaigning here, but that's, I'm mad, and I'm running for school board because I feel that funnel out there is falling apart. We are getting off topic. But you brought it up, so I wanted to respond to that.
Anybody else would like to address Mr. Kramer, the committee, or have an opportunity to speak?
I would, I don't know, Bill, refresh, Mayor Bill, why did we hire, who hired Bill and who was his duty to? Hired Bill Kramer, was it the village hired Bill or the council hired Bill?
Well, it was a council decision
To hire Bill?
to hire Bill. I mean, like I said, we have been in these discussions, discussing the overarching concept of shared services, of saving money. I mean, a lot that has been discussed here tonight about our financial condition is very true. So in an effort to address that from one part of the equation, the expense part of the equation, this conversation was developed. And as an assistant to, because we're not fire experts, Mr. Kramer was, in fact, he was one of 3 analysts, I believe it was 3 that we looked at.
Okay.
And he was local, he'd done work in this area before, he has a very good reputation, and it was decided upon it would be Mr.
So the council decided to hire. And I thought when we had our first meeting, or we came together as a committee, it was decided council would then step away and us as a resident committee would work with just Bill?
Yes.
Okay. It's come to my attention in these notes that the council member has been emailing me quite a bit of information and also asked for wording to be changed. And I'm wondering what the purpose of that was.
Well, I think that everybody was well-intentioned.
Okay.
And I think that Rob did a fantastic job of making sure I'm covering all the bases.
Okay.
And I do think all these alternatives, including what Mr. Kubicki talked about tonight, are still on the table.
Okay.
And look, I feel strongly one way, a lot of people do, but I wanted to make sure I had all the information. And a couple of times, Mr. Bartlett was able to clarify some things and provide more accurate information.
Let me interrupt a second. Did you request that, or did he just offer that?
No, I did not. Rob offered some, and then we had some double exchanges back and forth where I had to request clarification in return a few times.
Okay.
But that,
It was just
we're gonna
like it
shorten this
seemed-
report considerably. The next draft, we're gonna take out all those
Perfect.
emails
Okay.
and shorten the report a little bit, because the information's out there, and it added a lot of clarity, and it keeps all those options open.
Okay. All right, so we've got one more, at least
Couple
two.
more.
Yeah,
Couple
so a
more.
couple more people.
My
Hello.
name's Andrew Grant, and I followed your activity and really thank you for all the time you put into this. I had one question, and I'm not sure to whom to ask this, but when you do a buying of services or a merger, you typically vet the other party. And the other party in this case is Little Miami Fire District. My question is, who on the council vetted this organization before they put us through this drill? From a financial point of view, who vetted this? Did the finance committee?
I would, you could put my name next to that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Rob Bartlett. And so, and again, let's be really clear about this. The whole purpose, because Bill was part of this process as well. And it involved, with Chief Hines was there, Mr. Copeland was there as well. And what we were doing is exploring to say, is this worth even bringing forward? Because, and we also asked Mr. Kramer, we said, we want you to look at all the different options, not just one option. Because as we all talked about tonight, the village financial situation is not bright and rosy as people might think it is. And so, to Dennis Walter's point, before we go ask for people to take the taxes up, we want to make sure that we turn over every stone we can.
I
Never look them in the eye. And so, So the purpose of the meeting was to say, is this even worth bringing up or not? Is this worth us even engaging a consultant or anybody else to do this kind of work?
But do you do the financial review of the organization before you take those steps? The information is available, it's public information. You can look at their meetings, you can review a year's worth of history in their meetings, you can go back and you can look at their audited financial statements. Did you do that vetting?
I worked with Mike Clement, who was the previous administrator and has also now been for Columbia Township, I should be clear.
Okay.
But I'm not hearing you. I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the answer at all. Are you understanding?
The answer is not answering the question.
That's
The
kind
answer
of
is,
how
I
I
went
feel.
through with Mike Levin. I went through Mike Levin's numbers with him, yeah. He showed me the historical spending for Little
Did
Man.
you vet their financial statements? Did you request copies of their financial statements?
No, I relied on Mike Levin. I asked Mike Levin, since I trust him, he's a Mariemont resident, he's a former mayor of our village as well. And so I asked him to say, can you show me what your financials have been for the last 4 years?
Okay.
I did not go to them specifically.
I'm glad to know how you did it. I would point out to this committee, if you were to go back and read the audit from 2018, 2019, you would find an adverse auditor's opinion on that. And my question is, how can we even be spending time on a situation that has an audit problem and has numbers that have put their basic fund balance negative for 2 years, that they had to borrow money to come up with an approach for liquidity. Otherwise, for 2 years, they were in violation of state code. Without the loan from Fairfax, they would still be in trouble.
I believe, well, so again, Mike Levin showed me that they borrowed the money because they passed the levy. The levy was passed. And so they took the money because they can't start collecting that money until
For a year.
So that's
Why?
why they did that.
And the levy was passed 2 years after they had had a significant negative fund balance. And they could not meet payroll.
Correct.
I appreciate the back and forth. I want to keep this to time.
I'm sorry.
Obviously,
I'm sorry.
yes.
My question is, did we vet it? I hope we vetted it, because otherwise I feel real bad about the time you guys have spent. And I'm angry about any time that has upset our firefighters over this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more person who wanted to address.
I just had a quick question. Mr. Kramer, you had said that you got a lot of information, and no offense to Mr. Bartlett, but did you ask as a fire chief or the police chief for information about, to verify or just make sure that what you were given matched what they had, I guess? Was Mr. Copeland given the same chance to give you his numbers? That's basically what I would like to know.
Well, I think so. He came along a little later. I was already underway before Dan was appointed. We agreed to meet several times, and I made sure that Dan had a draft of what we had so far prior to.
But wouldn't he be the best source of information?
To be very clear, I think we spent some time, so Bill Herkamp, Matt Ayer, and Bill Lichter spent some time with Tony Bortry, with Assistant Chief Copeland, et cetera, trying to make sure that we were able to reconcile. And I want to be very, very clear when we're saying reconcile. I'm not suggesting that there's anything, I don't want anyone to take any kind of negative viewpoint on that. I think that municipal finance is somewhat complicated. I think that we have got a series of things that offset some of the expenses that we have to keep into account around grants that we may receive, around American Recovery Act funds that may be coming, et cetera. So I don't want people to think that there's something strange here. We spent a significant amount of time trying to make sure that we got to a set of numbers that we could all understand and believe in. And we as a committee spent time with, we spent some time with Assistant Chief Copeland, some of the firefighters touring the firehouse. The chief shared his very, very detailed accounting of his expenses, which he was very forthcoming and very willing to provide to us as a committee as well. Yes?
Yeah, as far as the time that Assistant Chief and I spend on a daily basis on this particular situation, proposal or whatever, is enormous. It's a daily thing that takes a lot of time from us that we need to be using doing other things. So, you know, and obviously, we're on a daily basis, we're crunching numbers, getting numbers from the girls upstairs, bill sheets showing what we've spent, so on and so forth. So it's taxing.
Yes.
It's very taxing, very, very taxing.
Are there, please, go ahead.
I'd just like to know who's going to make the final decision on this situation?
It's the
Is
council.
it going to be just strictly a council vote, or is it going to be taken to the residents for a vote?
It's up to the council at this
And
point.
you don't think the residents need to have any?
I absolutely think the residents should vote on it.
We'll talk about next steps in just a moment. I want to make sure that we get everybody to get public comment, but I want to make sure that everybody leaves here tonight with a very clear set of what's next and what the conclusion of this process is expected to be. Are there other comments?
I have one. Could we close the meeting with Bill's recommendations, just so it's fresh in our mind when we leave?
Let me talk about what comes next.
Thanks.
But I don't, everyone, okay?
It's premature to make a definitive recommendation. This process is still underway, Katie.
Okay.
So from my expectation of what happens next, we've got a draft report. We've heard some feedback tonight. I think there are some other edits and clarifications and things that you want to do to tighten up your report. This committee is going to issue a series of recommendations in response to Mr. Kramer's report and a series of recommendations to the council. I would like that to occur as quickly as possible because this has really gone on, I think, and been, as Chief Hines said, I think fairly taxing for our public servants as well as many other folks. So I would like to issue a response to the council and a recommendation within a week, and this will all be a matter of public document for everybody. So we will react to the final recommendation. One of our recommendations to the council is going to be that any substantive change to the current fire EMS, whether it's location, staffing patterns, coverage, et cetera, would be something that would need to be brought to the voters.
Is that something that we could anticipate? I hate to put the pressure on, but when I have this for next Monday's council meeting, I would have to have that report by Friday.
I would very much like to deliver you a series of recommendations on Friday.
You know, I'd like to put in my 2 cents worth, and if and whatever the committee as a whole, I'm just one member, and if one member thinks one thing and the rest of the committee thinks something else, I understand an overwhelming majority opinion might override what I might say right now, but the recommendation of any substantive change that we make to fire staffing model, location, and so forth, I agree with the intent of that. I agree with that's conceptually important, that everybody here in Mariemont would know what's going on and that they would have an opportunity to participate. And but I'm not going so far as to say that I think that any substantive change to the fire model needs to go to a referendum, because that's complicated. And I think that ties the hands of our village council. These are our friends and our neighbors that we elect every couple years to make key decisions for our village. And let's say, for example, and I'm not suggesting that this is a good idea, but let's say, for example, a few years from now, we do some more studying and we decide that maybe we want to have 3 people on the overnight shift instead of 4. Not suggesting we do that, not even saying it's a good idea, but let's say that council believes that's a good idea. That shouldn't need to go to a referendum, I wouldn't think, if it's being communicated to the village residents and we have an opportunity for public comment, and it's not something that's rushed into, and it's not something that's done on emergency measures in a council meetings. If there were a process, I actually disagree with that as being a recommendation that any substantive change to our service departments would require a referendum. And also, when you have a referendum, it's got disadvantages because you have to come up with ballot language. You have to put it, and it becomes a binary choice. You're either going to go this way or this way. You get there's disinformation that gets out into the public when you have an election process. So I would come at that a little bit differently. And in fact, I would even say, and to Mr. Grant's point, which was an excellent one, did we do everything right as far as doing all the vetting that we should do before we even thinking about something? You know, there's some really good points there, and it's a learning process, but there are some aspects to this process. Hiring a third-party expert who did this very cost-effectively, I think, too, that was something that residents felt strongly about. I know that I personally did, is that this isn't about cost as the primary factor. The primary factor is safety. The primary factor is how long does it take for that paramedic to arrive at my house, and things like that. Those are the primary factors, and that was the purpose of hiring Mr. Kramer as well, too, is this isn't a financial decision, that this is a safety decision. And to your point, it's also an excellent one, that perhaps we didn't do all the vetting that we could have before we even engaged with Little Miami in discussion. So anyway, I would come at this differently with the exact same intent that you have, Katie and Tracy, but I think that that's strong language to say that we shouldn't make any substantive change without going to the voters.
Well, I was on council when we went to the voters with this issue 12 or so years ago, and I can say that compared to the information we've gathered here from this process, we went into that thing blind as a bat. And the residents just said, absolutely no, we want to keep our fire department. I feel too that they did not have this information. And I recommend all of you pay attention to ICRC and talk to your neighbors about this and keep this thing alive, because this is a really good process.
So we're going to have to, we'll take a couple more public comments, but we are going to have to wrap this up at some point. So go ahead.
I kind of disagree with them. I think that everybody in this community has a right to know what's going to happen with this and not have it just sit with a few people to make this decision. I think this is something that everybody in the village should have a say in. And I know we all vote for council members and so forth, but this is a little different. This is our safety. This is our lives. It's the lives of our neighbors. It's the lives of our children in school, the patients up at the nursing home. All of that is involved in this. And I think that is something that needs to go to the public and say, hey, what do you think? Maybe down the street, or down the lane a little bit, we're going to need to make a tax change or something. Would you be willing to do that if you can keep your safety? And if you can keep your fire department here and your police and everybody else, that's what this community is for. If you go back to with Mariemont, she had this as a self-contained community with its own fire department, with its own police department, with all of these things for this community, not to share all of our things with everybody around. And I think you're taking that away from us. And yes, I'll go up and down the street. I've already done that and talked about this with some of my neighbors. But I think at the same time, we have to give this some thought as to what everybody's going to think about this, not just a few. And I think all of us have a right to have a say in this.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Can I
Bill?
add one?
Yep.
As this conversation was evolving over time, and there were various scenarios being played out, whether there would be experiments run, trials run, so on and so forth, I became increasingly alarmed in this regard that I'm hearing from the leagues, that this is too big, this was going to be too big of a decision for council to make, and that we must have greater public participation in this exercise. Hence, all of you are sitting here tonight because of that decision that was made to engage the residents, to engage the community in what we are doing here. And just let me say this, should the decision of this group and council be at odds with what the residents of the village essentially feel, as I understand it, you don't need us to put this to a referendum. The process of a referendum is essentially, you go to the Board of Elections, you get petitions, you get signatures, you create the language under which you want the referendum to state, and you go around and you get the signatures and it gets on the ballot. So no resident is blocked from putting this to a referendum should the decision of council, this group, be at odds, considerably at odds with the residents. I'm fairly certain I'm correct in that. Yeah.
Ma'am, are you saying then that we should wait and then have a resident needs to go and put it on the referendum? Why would it not be better to just put it on the ballot to begin with, rather than having the resident have to go out and get a referendum to put it on the ballot?
I think that Bill's saying if council goes against what Bill's recommendations were, or the resident committee, or what they've been hearing in the public hearing, then we should do a referendum. He's hoping that council follows what the villagers want.
What the opinion is going to be. We don't, for all we know, it could be favorable. We don't know yet. And it may be premature to race it to a referendum. I think the process is fair, honest, and accurate, and we should allow it to play out.
Yeah.
Louise, I mostly agree with everything that you said, and and I think that everybody in this room could agree on something. We'll see. Is that if the village were to be in a position where they thought it would be best to cut our safety services, whether it would be police or fire, make some significant cut or huge change in our safety service because we need to save some money before we go ask the voters for the money that we need to keep the safety services that we all expect, that would be something that our council, our mayor, every street in Mariemont, and you and me and everybody else would be banging on the door here saying, tax us, ask us for money before you make a decision like that, if that's what the factors are here. So I don't really know that we're at odds so much, and I'm a little bit just more concerned about making a recommendation that any substantive change needs to go to the voters. But so it's really more, and it's a kind of a finer point, but I'm in complete agreement that council's not going to make a change, a drastic change to our fire department to save money if it's against the will of the community and if they haven't gone and asked the community for more money. That's I think that everybody would agree with that.
So this is a very serious and very emotional and obviously a very personal issue to everybody in Mariemont. And I want to assure all of the residents that we've taken it very seriously, that we've tried very hard to make sure that we are gathering a fact base that we can all look at to make some sort of a understanding. What are the implications to our service levels? What are the financial pros and cons? And I don't think that there's anybody who has shirked in their duties in this, and we've been trying to be very transparent and have a number of public forums where people can come and provide their input into this. So I want everybody to understand that this is not being done in any, secretive fashion. We really want this to be a public piece, and we want all of the documents that were, the Kramer report and certainly our recommendations will all be public. And from then, those are recommendations to council, and council has a duty, and it sounds as if we're attempting to try to make sure this comes to another public forum as quickly as possible, because I think and it sounds as if Chief Hines would very much like to see this resolved as soon as possible, because I am very concerned about the time that it is taking for our fire, EMS, and police personnel to continue to operate in any sort of an uncertain future.
Yeah, it's having a negative effect on morale in every department in this village. I've been here for 34 years and I've never seen the employees' morale as low as it is right now. And it's basically because of what's been going on. So yes, love to see it come to an end. Absolutely.
All right. With that, I think this meeting will adjourn, and we'll look forward to presenting the committee's recommendations to the council. And I would ask people to watch out for the posting of the public agenda. We'll see if this gets onto the agenda for is it next Monday?
Yes.
Thank you, Tracy.